Yes, folks, New Zealand's speech is now controlled by the EU. Now, I always thought that the UN was the main driver behind most of the globalist agenda, but apparently not. Now, today's video was prompted by a commenter named Make New Zealand Great Again about 3 weeks ago on this channel, before YouTube announced their new hate speech rules and before Cross the Rubicon's channel was suspended. Have a look. Yeah, now I read an article with a copy of a document just put out by the EU a few weeks ago. And the document was saying regarding social media sites that sites are to have anti-globalist channels, etc. removed, regardless of what the laws of any country are regarding censorship. The international law will override them. I just tried to find that document again. Sorry, I couldn't locate it, but it's out there somewhere, or it's been censored. It said the completion date is 9 December 2019. 9 December 2019. Now that date, 9 December, made my ears prick up because 2 days later YouTube announced their new hate speech rules, and soon after Cross the Rubicon had his channel suspended. Now I couldn't find that document either, but I think the following has something to do with it. Now I have posted a link to this article in the description below. EU can force Facebook and social media platforms to remove content globally. This includes content that is posted by users outside of the European Union. October 4, 2019. The European Court of Justice has ruled that users of Facebook or any other host provider will be able to request for content to be taken down if it is considered unlawful. The effects of these blocks will not only be enforced in the individual's country of residence, but will be applied worldwide. The court said on Thursday that host providers can be forced to block a piece of content globally if any of the European Union's national courts come to the decision that the content in question is defamatory or unlawful. As the decision was made in Europe's highest court, it cannot be appealed. Anyway, I'll just scroll down to another bit I found quite interesting. While Facebook has pushed the narrative that it should not be held legally responsible for the material posted on its social media platforms, it has taken the steps to control its content to address the growing scrutiny of governments around the world. A fortnight ago, it implemented various policy changes that were aimed at preventing the spread of terrorist and extremist content. So let's just click this link. Facebook policy changes around harmful content gains support from New Zealand PM Ardern. The changes were prompted by the Christchurch call that happened earlier this year. So here's the Ardern link. But why is our speech controlled by the EU? Maybe this, perhaps.
A big move for New Zealand overnight, securing talks that will bring the country one step closer to a $1 billion trade deal.
It's extremely good news. There is already significant trade between the European Union and New Zealand, and we would expect a significant boost as a result of a successful conclusion of these negotiations.
Yeah, and then there is this.
Do you use Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or Snapchat to keep up with the world? 68% of Americans get at least some of their news through social media, and for the under 30 set, that figure's a lot higher. The tech giants are private companies and for the most part have the freedom to determine what's posted on their platforms. But are their choices about what content to remove and who to evict really being made free from government pressures?
It's not enough to just give people a voice. We need to make sure that people aren't using it to harm other people or to spread misinformation.
Can you define hate speech?
Senator, I think that this is a really hard question.
We should be particularly worried about asking platforms to take things down if they're over in this realm where it's very hard to tell what's illegal and where what you're taking down might be important public political speech.
Daphne Keller is a former Google attorney who's currently a law professor at Stanford. She says that the tech giants are facing pressure from governments worldwide to clamp down on a variety of content on their platform. From terrorist propaganda to disinformation to hate speech. The European Union is currently debating new so-called terrorist content regulations, which would mandate that tech giants prohibit so-called violent or extremist speech and propaganda on their platforms. Keller says the worst versions would empower police to inform tech companies when they see posts violating the terms of service social media users agree to when first signing up.
The European Commission has looked to terms of service as a means of getting platforms to take down content without going through the process of passing a new law or a regulation. The hate speech code of conduct was negotiated between Microsoft, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the European Commission, and that...
Yeah, now from this we can clearly see that all of the social media globalists are working in unison with the globalist EU.
That commits those platforms to using their terms of service to prohibit hate speech under a definition that's derived from European law. But because they're using their terms of service to do it, that means that the prohibition is global.
So are we, in a sense, living under European Union internet regulation right now in America?
To a certain extent.
I would say more than that.
Things that would be politically difficult and perhaps unconstitutional, or in some cases certainly unconstitutional, to mandate here, we don't have to even consider because they get mandated in Europe and then companies apply them globally.
Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey says that his company follows a speech code developed by the United Nations.
Doesn't the UN Declaration guarantee the right of all people through any medium to express their opinion?
It does.
Then why ban hate speech?
It also has conditions around particular speech, inciting violence, and some of the aspects that we speak to as well.
And it protects specific categories, whether it's religion, race, gender, sexual orientation. Those are also protected under the UN Covenant.
Article 20 of the United Nations Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that Dorsey references says that so-called hate speech, which it defines as any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, shall be prohibited by law. The First Amendment, by contrast, prevents the U.S. government from regulating speech based on content.
Yeah, so why is the US government allowing this then?
People might be airing legitimate grievances about something their government is doing or something that a foreign government is doing. They might be engaging in conversation that is very important in their political context. If that gets mistaken for terrorism by a sort of trigger-happy employee sitting in...
Yep, and that's happening already.
California, that's going to disrupt really core political speech.
Keller calls this effect collateral censorship and says we've seen it on the internet before when strict copyright enforcement led to unnecessary takedowns.
We've found that there are a lot of bad faith notices You get things like the government of Ecuador using a nonsense copyright claim to get journalistic criticism taken down. The Church of Scientology used some spurious copyright accusations to get criticism taken down. And there's research showing that some platforms just don't even bother to try to decide which allegations are true and which allegations are false. They just honor all of them.
I am optimistic that over a 5 to 10 year period, we will have AI tools that can get into some of the nuances, the linguistic nuances of different types of content to be more accurate in flagging things for our systems.
Does that solve the problem?
No, AI does not solve the problem. Everybody who claims that there are filters or AI or machine learning that can solve these problems has something to sell.
Has an agenda.
The public has very little information about how well any of it is working. There are two major studies I'm aware of about the efficacy of filters in identifying unlawful content, and both of them cast serious doubt.
One study out of Vrije University Amsterdam found that AI designed to catch hate speech on Twitter misclassified it 80% of the time.
80% of the time. That is pathetic.
Another joint study out of China and the UK found that hate speech lacks unique discriminative features and is difficult to discover. And after Europe reached an agreement with the tech companies to build a terrorism hash database that used AI to automatically flag and remove extremist propaganda, YouTube took down an entire archive meant to document war crimes in Syria.
These lawmakers and policymakers are motivated by wanting to stop the spread of terrorism, wanting to stop what's become known as self-radicalization. What's the big deal that a few things get taken down accidentally if we're stopping people from joining ISIS?
Right now, we don't have any clear information telling us that taking down all of these videos really is making us safer. In fact, a lot of people who are expert researchers on security are concerned that this will effectively drive more people into darker corners of the internet, into echo chambers where they only ever hear from people who agree with a violent agenda. There are people in law enforcement who would prefer sometimes to leave things up so that they can monitor what's going on and go after the perpetrators of real-world violence.
Yes, and she's absolutely correct there. These new rules will only drive violent terrorists underground and make them harder for police to monitor.
So it's not clear what the security upside is. At the same time, it's not entirely clear what the speech and expression downside is. We know there's a downside. We know those 100,000 videos from the Syrian archive that were documenting violence in Syria for future prosecution disappeared. We know there's harm to speech, but we can't quantify that either because we don't have the data and transparency from platforms or from governments to understand that side of the calculation.
Yes, folks, this globalist agenda that is permeating the West right now is very bleak indeed. And I'm afraid to say this, but a lot of our present problems stem from free market policies. While free market policies have delivered a lot, they have also delivered open borders, a lack of sovereign rights, and an awful amount of political correctness.